talking a little bit about the Central African Republic and the struggles that that country is experiencing right now. So Central African Republic, the word central means in the middle. So the Central African Republic is located right smack in the middle of the continent of Africa. I don't know if you guys know a lot about this landlocked country. I knew a little bit, but I knew that we were going to be talking about this conflict today, so I decided to do a little bit of a deeper dive and find out a little bit more information to give you guys a context or a framework about this country and what they're experiencing right now, because it is very, very different from the day-to-day lifestyle that I live here in the United States in Nashville, Tennessee. So just to share with you guys a little bit, Central African Republic is smack in the middle. It's a landlocked country, meaning that it's surrounded by land on its borders. And just to give you guys a little bit more of a context, so Central African Republic has been inhabited for over 1,000 years. It was primarily just local villagers who lived there until after about World War I, when it was governed by the country of France. So France came in and they ruled the country. And so one of the national languages actually in the middle of Central African Republic, in the middle of the continent of Africa, is French. So a lot of the local people there speak a combination of French and the local language that they all spoke before the French arrived. So France governed the Central African Republic until about 1960, and then they decided that the country wanted to rule itself. They wanted to represent themselves, and so there's been a big power struggle between different political organizations within the Central African Republic, because they all have different ideas about how they want the country to be ruled. They all have different ideas about who should be in power, what religion should be represented, and there's a lot of conflict and civil war that creates a lot of bloodshed and a lot of violence and a lot of really terrible things that we're gonna talk about. So, just to give you guys a little bit of an idea of what that looks like. So, do you guys remember the word refugees? Okay. Does anyone remember what that word means that can share with us, Quantavion?
Refugee means when somebody is trying to go somewhere safe, their country is like terrible, and people just plenty of violence in their country, and they try to go somewhere that's safe where they can be safe.
Exactly. Great job. So the chances of them living a normal life where they live is just impossible, to the point where they just have to flee where they're living and live somewhere else. So in Nashville, in Davidson County, which is the county that we live in, we have about 659,042 people. The number of people that had to leave the Central African Republic just to be safe was 935,000 people. 935,000 people. So that's all. Imagine the entire city of Nashville had to pick up, pack what they could, and just leave town. You, your family, your neighbors, everyone you know that lives around here or within half an hour of here has to pick up and move, plus a city the third the size of Nashville just had to pick up and get out of here because it was just so unsafe to live there. That is a huge amount of people. That's almost 1 million people that had to leave their homes and get out of there. So my mind was blown when I realized there was that sheer amount of people. So I want to show you guys a little bit about who these people are. When the different groups, and the group that we're going to talk about today is the Seleka, they came in and they raid villages and they burn villages, and this is all because they want to be in charge of the country and they want to show how powerful they are. And they actually kidnap children and force them to become soldiers. These could be people your age or a little bit older than you who are forced to fight and kill their neighbors and kill people that are strangers. They're forced into a life that they were not able to choose for themselves. It's pretty scary. This is just to show you guys an example. These are some people that lived in a village, and they've all piled everything that they could on top of this car, and they're riding wherever they can just to get out of the city because it's that desperate of a situation for them to get out of there. So when I saw this little car loaded up with all these people, I thought that was pretty incredible. This is an example of a village that had been burned by the soldiers. So they'll just come in and loot just to show that they think that they should be in charge of the country. This is just to show you guys a refugee camp. We talked about this a little bit the other day, but this is just to show you guys the tent cities that these people live in. You can see that they all are forced into these really tight quarters, and they live together as best as they can in these makeshift little tent cities that they create. Over 1 million people live in places like this. This is just to show you guys, I wanted to kind of end this PowerPoint and showing you some of the more beautiful parts of this country, because we focus so much on the conflict that's happening right there and the struggles that the people are going through, but there's a lot of beauty in the country too. If they find a way to have a more peaceful future. This is just an example of how some of the traditional tribes dress. These are the Fula tribe. This is a village, and this is what a village might look like before they come in and loot and burn and things like that. But there's a lot of different terrain in the country of the Central African Republic. There's jungle, there's savannas, there's waterfalls. It's very different in the different areas of the country. So this is an example of some of the more forest regions there, which are very green and dense and beautiful. Here is a waterfall in the Mbabali River. And they have a lot of, it's too dangerous for tourists or outside visitors who want to come and visit the Central African Republic. But if they are able to have a more peaceful community, it's their hope that they can build up their tourism so people can come and see the natural beauty there. And yeah, elephants that live there, gorillas, leopards, lions, cheetahs, rhinos, all different kinds of really exotic and endangered animals live in this country, but we can't go visit there right now because it's just too dangerous. So we hope that they are able to find peace. So I just wanted to show you guys a little bit about what it's like in this country. So with that said, we will move on to the article. Do they have this article yet?
No.
We'll hand that out to you guys. So we're going to read this article together, and then we're going to do a little bit of a review about the double bubble thinking map, and then we're going to have you guys create a new thinking map. I know that you weren't here the day that we went over the double bubble map. You weren't here either? Okay. But we'll review that, and I think you guys will be able to complete one. Thinking maps are a way to show about how we make connections and how we think. And they're a really useful tool when you're trying to compare two different things. So, as you can see, the picture at the beginning of the article is actually of a boy who was forced to be a child soldier, and he's holding a rifle that's actually been carved out of wood because he's performing a skit about what his life was like. So this says, a former child soldier performed a skit about his life with the rebels when officials from the UN Children's Fund visited the Central African Republic in March of 2014. His face is not pictured to protect his identity. During civil strife in the country, many children served as soldiers in the battles. So this is in Sebut in the Central African Republic. At the age of 14, Jordy isn't much taller than his gun. It was a way to protect myself. It was a way to survive, said Jordy, a former child soldier. I did a lot of bad things, he said, eyes downcast. I took people's things by force. The conflict tearing the Central African Republic apart has turned neighbor against neighbor. For many children, it has ended their childhood. Children have seen their parents killed and watched as boys and girls just like them were hurt. They have been forced to make decisions far beyond their years. Some decided to join the fighters who ruined their lives. Wow. So this is a pretty heavy topic, guys. I want you to know right now that the conflict has died down quite a bit. It was at the height of its violence in 2013 and 14. But this child has been able to leave the army that he was a part of. But it was a way of surviving for him to go along with the people who were harming him. So children left behind. Do I have a volunteer that can read this first paragraph? Go ahead, Antonia.
Children have been victims in virtually every conflict in this country. One of the poorest in the world. More than a year ago, a rebel group known as the
Celica?
seized power from the government. Seized power from the government. As many as 3,500 children were part of it. Other armed groups started fighting back, and the number of child soldiers grew to 6,000. Some children, like Jordy, were handed guns, while other children were made slaves.
Great job. So as I mentioned, the Celica is that group of rebels, or a group of people who are going against the government, and they seized or took by force power from the government. Thank you, Antonia. Do I have another volunteer to read? Go ahead, Anton.
Their children barely in their teens still are with the fire. Even by day on threatening travelers on the road.
Go ahead.
Rifles and machetes or smoke over their shoulders, and the fighters have protected charms draped around their necks. The Celica left behind nearly 400 children with their were pushed from
I'm going to pause you there for just a second. Okay, so this is talking about children and teens who were fighting. They fought with rifles and machetes, which were those big knives. And when Celica left power, that group of rebels, there were 400 children who were left behind with no one to fend for them. Wow. So this is a young lady, she's only 14, and a colonel who's a high official in this rebel group forced her into marriage. Can you imagine that ever happening? That's pretty scary. Okay, I'm gonna read this last paragraph, guys, and then we're gonna create a double bubble map. Hold up. We're gonna go over how to do it again, and then you guys are gonna create them on your own. And I really wanna see some improvement from our last double bubble maps, and we'll talk about that. Yes. I'm going to show you, because you weren't here, so I'm going to review that. And I think you'll pick up on it pretty quickly. As soon as I get everybody's attention, we'll get going. Okay. Reuniting the 78 girls freed by the Celica with their families has been especially difficult. Many children don't even know where their relatives are. Hundreds of thousands have fled their homes in the fighting. So even when these children were released, guys, they didn't even know where their families were to be able to be reunited with their parents to be safe with them. So they were still refugees waiting to be reunited with their families. Humanitarian workers, so those are helpful people who come in from outside countries to help out. Humanitarian workers who are caring for some of the former fighters can spend months trying to locate their families. When families can be traced, they may be slow to take their sons back. Children who have been with the rebels have a hard time obeying their parents. Many children still march with the fighters, but those who have left struggle to find a way forward. Muriel said she'd like to go back to school, and Jordy said he would like to try farming. Charlie, though, has already been approached by militias eager to take advantage of his knowledge of the Celica. With a gun, he said, you always have money. So it sounds like these two children, we've got Muriel, the child bride, and Jordy, who was the first child soldier that we read about in the previous page, who are eager to go back to their normal lives. But now we've got Charlie, who really had no support from his parents, who's considering going back into one of these rebel groups and fighting with them because that's a way of life that he feels like he can get ahead in. Remember, he was pointing to his flip-flops and saying, when I was working with his army, I had clothes, I had boots. So he's really, sounds like he's struggling with these two kinds of lifestyles. So we're just going to go over, again, the double bubble maps. And when I said I'd like to see a little improvement in these, what I meant by that is I'd like to see you guys including more details in your double bubble map that are really important. Right, exactly. More things that would let someone who didn't know anything about this country know about it. Take some of your newfound knowledge about this country and incorporate that into your map. We're going to do a little bit of review. Go ahead.
Let her give you the information, the directions first. Don't start asking questions until she's giving you the instructions, and she hasn't. So if you just wait a minute and let her tell you everything you need to know, she's gonna tell you what you need to know.
And that is a good question. But what we're going to do is I want you to pick one character from this article that we just read, maybe a character that intrigued you or that you related to for whatever reason, and I want you to compare your life to theirs, and we're going to talk about how you're going to make that comparison. So with the double bubble map, you have your two topics that you focus on. So one would be myself, and then the other would be this marker is no good. The other person. And what I want you to do is find 3 things that you feel like you have in common with that person. Try to dig a little bit deeper than just boy, girl, things that you feel like you might have in common. Okay? Okay, so that's what you're going to put in these bubbles right here. The thing that you might have in common with that person that you choose from this article. Okay? And then on the other side, you're going to have 3 bubbles. And these are going to be the differences. Obviously, your lives are very different from the children that we just read about. So there's going to be a lot of differences, but I want you to dig deep to what some of these similarities could be. And remember, the things that you talk about need to be related. So if you said the country of origin is what you're going to talk about. So you might say, I live in the United States. This child lives in the Central African Republic. So you're talking about the countries in these, okay? So keep your topics that you talk about your similarities, or your differences rather, the same. Any questions for me so far? No? Okay. I will get you guys some paper. Go ahead, Anton. We are going to work independently on our own. This is a great tool to use when you guys are working on essays. When you're trying to compare 2 different things, you can use this as a rough draft for an essay to help you organize your ideas and your thoughts. So I will be around with paper and pencils.